She claimed to have spoken with invisible masters, beings who lived beyond the reach of matter, beyond the veil of this world. She said she had crossed deserts, temples, secret gates, and borders that no army could pass through. She entered places forbidden not just by politics or geography, but by reality itself. She walked among mystics in Egypt, debated scholars in India, and vanished for years in the icy heart of the Himalayas. She came back not with proof, but with knowledge, with visions, with teachings that shattered what the world thought it knew about the universe. Some called her a prophet, others a fraud. Some worshipped her as a guardian of truth. Others feared her as a manipulator, a magician, a master of illusion. But everyone, friend or enemy, agreed on one thing. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was no ordinary woman. She ignited a movement that would influence mystics, scientists, psychologists, revolutionaries, even spiritual leaders of the 20th century. She wrote books that defied the arrogance of science and dismantled the dogmas of religion. She spoke of astral travel, of karma, of the cycles of reincarnation, of beings who live in dimensions we can't even perceive. She dared to say, out loud, that the world we see is just a shadow, a surface, a projection, and that the truth, the real truth, lies beyond that veil. A veil she claimed to have crossed, a veil she wanted to tear down, not just for herself, but for all of humanity. But who was she really? A mystic, a genius, a gifted deceiver, a madwoman touched by the unknown? Why did her words cause so much fear and so much devotion in equal measure? Why is it that more than a century after her death, her name still echoes in whispers among scholars, occultists, skeptics, and seekers of forbidden truths? This is not just the biography of a woman. This is a descent into a question that still haunts the deepest corners of our consciousness. A story woven with light and shadow. A tale of symbols, mysteries, and danger. Because when you challenge the structure of reality, when you say that what is real is not all that exists, you become a threat, you become a mirror, one that shows us that maybe we're not who we think we are. So now, I ask you, what if everything you call reality is just a veil? And behind that veil is the truth that no one was ever meant to see. This is the story of the woman who tried to lift it. Helena Blavatsky. She was born into a world of cold palaces and strict customs. The year was 1831. The place, Yekaterinoslav, in the vast wintry empire of Tsarist Russia. Her name, Helena Petrovna von Hahn, the daughter of nobility, the granddaughter of a high-ranking imperial governor. Her bloodline carried privilege, power, and tradition. But Helena was born different. While others in her aristocratic family learned French etiquette and Orthodox prayers, Helena wandered through the halls speaking to people who weren't there. Servants whispered that the child spoke in tongues, that she saw things, that she described visions too precise, too vivid to be mere dreams. Some feared her, others said she had inherited the mysticism of her great-grandmother, a woman rumored to have been a seer. From a young age, Helena was drawn to books, but not the ones approved by governesses or clergymen. She devoured tales of ancient civilizations, lost continents, alchemy, the Kabbalah, astrology, the Vedas. Her mind was ablaze with the need to understand not just the world, but what lay behind it, beneath it, beyond it. At night, she often awoke screaming, not from nightmares, but from visions. She described floating above her own body, moving through places she had never seen, but described in detail. She claimed to have met beings made of light, teachers who spoke without words. She sketched symbols and geometries no one had taught her. She drew stars not yet catalogued by astronomers. At first, her family thought it was a phase, a symptom of a wild imagination, maybe of her mother's early death, or her overexposure to dangerous literature. But the episodes didn't fade. They intensified. There were stories, rumors at first, that she could move small objects with her mind, that she could predict visitors before they arrived, that she spoke with voices not her own, that she entered trances, and when she awoke, she remembered nothing, but left behind drawings, words, and names from languages she never studied. By the age of 15, she had outgrown the limits of her world, the drawing rooms, the expectations, the arranged futures. Helena was not made to be a wife or a silent figure in a nobleman's estate, but society had other plans. At 17, she was married off, quickly, almost forcefully, to Nikifor Blavatsky, a middle-aged general twice her age. It was a decision she did not make. It was a future she did not choose. The marriage lasted barely a few months. Some say she never allowed him to touch her. Others claim she escaped during the honeymoon. What is known is that one day, she simply vanished. Gone. No letters, no word, no trace. She disappeared from aristocratic life and reappeared years later in the most unexpected places: Cairo, Constantinople, Athens, Bombay, even Tibet. But before those journeys, there was silence, a mysterious gap in her timeline. Years when no one knew where she was or who she was with. And it is during this gap that the legend begins. Helena would later say she was being prepared, that during those years she was guided, not just by people, but by forces, that she traveled not only across land and sea, but through consciousness itself. She claimed to have been led by a presence, sometimes a voice, sometimes a vision, sometimes a man in white robes whom she would later call Moria, a being who told her she had a mission, a purpose, that she had been chosen, not to follow, but to remember. Remember what? The knowledge buried in time, the truths hidden beneath centuries of dogma, fear, and control, the patterns of the universe, the secret history of humanity, and more than anything else, that what most people called reality was only a surface layer, a projection, a veil. Behind it was something else, something vast, structured, intelligent. She wasn't sent to believe in it. She was sent to unveil it. But how did a runaway aristocrat, a young Russian woman in the 1800s, find her way into ancient temples, secret lodges, hidden monasteries, and forbidden regions of the world? How did she access teachings that were supposedly locked away by millennia of initiation and secrecy? Was it pure chance, coincidence, fabrication, or was there something or someone guiding her? What was it that called to her from beyond the ordinary? By the time she re-emerged into the public eye, Helena was no longer a wandering noblewoman. She had become something else, something undefined. She wore strange garments, spoke in riddles, wrote obsessively, claimed to have met sages that no one could verify, quoted scriptures she never studied, described symbols lost to time, but always there were the visions, and always there were the voices. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky did not just reject the world she came from, she rewired it. She would say, in her later years, that the greatest illusion humanity suffers from is that this world is the only one, that there is only one reality, that there is only one truth. But she had seen others, and those others had seen her. This was the beginning, not of her journey, but of ours. Because from that moment forward, Helena Blavatsky would no longer be a footnote in the journals of the elite. She would become a disruption in the timeline of thought, a fracture in the mirror of consensus reality, a question mark carved into history itself, not with violence, not with power, but with something far more dangerous, an idea. After vanishing from the aristocratic world, Helena Blavatsky began a journey that would defy explanation. Not just a physical journey across continents, but a metaphysical odyssey across the borders of perception itself. She resurfaced in Egypt, but she wasn't there for the pyramids or the relics. She claimed to have entered hidden circles, esoteric brotherhoods that carried the remnants of ancient Atlantean knowledge, orders that survived in secret, passed down through the ages by whispers, symbols, and ritual. She spoke of initiations, of being tested, of encountering guardians who did not ask for money or loyalty, but for understanding, for readiness. In the temples of Luxor, she said, she encountered remnants of a wisdom that predated recorded history, a system of cosmic knowledge encrypted in symbols, concealed from the profane, but alive for those with awakened sight. From Egypt, she moved through sacred geography, to Greece, where the ruins of mystery schools still echoed in silence, to Turkey, where ancient Sufi mysticism blended with Hermetic currents, to India, where the Vedas breathed through chants and fire, and where the invisible was not denied, but honored. And then, she began to speak of Tibet. In the 19th century, Tibet was sealed off from the world, no outsiders allowed. Many who tried to cross its borders disappeared, were killed, or turned back by the sheer hostility of the terrain. But Blavatsky insisted. She entered, more than once. She claimed she was led there by unseen hands, that she stayed in monasteries no map had marked, that within those mountains she was taught by beings she called the Mahatmas, the masters of the hidden brotherhood. These were not mythological figures, nor gods, nor ghosts. They were, as she described them, advanced human beings. Consciousnesses so evolved that they could appear and disappear at will, speak through thought, transmit knowledge across space, affect matter with intention. They called themselves members of the Great White Brotherhood, not in terms of race but of light, of purity, of spiritual radiance. According to Blavatsky, they were the protectors of a sacred science, one that united spirit and matter, soul and cosmos, past and future. And they had chosen her, not because she was perfect, but because she was willing to endure, to sacrifice, to serve a cause beyond personal power. She wrote of receiving messages from them, sometimes physically, in letters that appeared mysteriously inside closed boxes or within the walls of locked rooms, other times telepathically, in dreams or trances. Skeptics dismiss these claims as fantasy, but those who met her, those who witnessed her eyes change, her voice shift, her knowledge appear from nowhere, were not so quick to laugh. She described being taken beyond her body, in what she called astral travel, her consciousness leaving the physical form, guided by the masters, shown the architecture of reality from a level no telescope could see. She spoke of laws, universal, impersonal, cosmic, the law of karma, the law of cycles, the law of correspondence, teachings that resonated with ancient doctrines from the East, the Kabbalah, and Hermetic philosophy. Time, she said, was not linear. Matter, she claimed, was only a condensation of spirit, and spirit was the origin of all. She didn't teach this as a belief. She presented it as fact, as a structure, a system, a framework of truths that had been preserved in hidden schools throughout history. She said the Vedas spoke in veiled symbols, that the Egyptian Book of the Dead encoded deep cosmological truths, that the teachings of Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, all pointed to the same source. But this source had been forgotten, diluted, distorted, and her mission as she saw it was to awaken memory, to remind humanity that it had not begun in ignorance, but had fallen into it. According to her, the story of human evolution taught by Darwin was only a fragment, the outer skin of a deeper, more mystical unfolding. Humanity, she said, had passed through earlier ages, root races, each with their own strengths, their own lessons, their own tragedies. Atlantis, Lemuria, lost continents, forgotten wisdom. Civilizations not of crude stone and fire, but of energy, of mind, of vibration. She said this wasn't legend. It was history, misremembered, buried under the sands of time, hidden beneath symbols in temples, preserved in the minds of those few who had not fallen asleep. And the masters were their heirs. Some claimed she had gone mad, that no such beings could exist. Others, quiet seekers, mystics, and spiritual explorers, felt a strange familiarity in her words, as if something she said rang true, not in the intellect, but somewhere deeper. It wasn't that she was creating new ideas, It was that she was reactivating something forgotten. She never asked to be followed. She asked people to think, to study, to meditate, to observe. Her writings were not meant to convert, but to shock, to awaken. And they did. In her travels, she challenged fakirs and gurus, debated priests and scholars, rejected blind faith and blind skepticism. She demanded that reality be questioned, all of it. She never claimed perfection. She claimed purpose. And the message she repeated again and again was this: there is no miracle, only laws we do not yet understand. So what are we to make of her story? Was she really taken into Himalayan monasteries no one could find? Did she really meet beings beyond the boundaries of modern understanding? Or did she travel somewhere even more inaccessible, into the unexplored realms of consciousness? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is clear. When Helena Blavatsky returned from these journeys, she brought something with her, something the world could not explain, and many to this day still try. In 1875, New York City was a place of noise, invention, and illusion. Steam trains thundered through the streets. Electric lights were being tested for the first time. The city pulsed with an energy that promised progress, but also concealed deep anxieties about the spiritual emptiness that progress seemed to leave behind. It was here, in this unlikely crucible of modern ambition, that Helena Blavatsky made her boldest move. Together with Henry Steele Olcott, a lawyer and Civil War veteran, and William Quan Judge, a young Irish esotericist, she founded the Theosophical Society. The word theosophy was not new. It had appeared in mystical texts centuries earlier. But what Blavatsky meant by it was something radical for her time. Theosophy, she said, was the pursuit of the ancient wisdom, the timeless universal knowledge that lay hidden beneath all religions, all philosophies, all sciences. A current of truth that had flowed through the ages, masked by symbols, distorted by dogma, and buried under centuries of fear. She believed that behind every sacred text, whether Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, or Islamic, there was a common language, a metaphysical code, a blueprint of the cosmos that had once been known by the ancients, and then forgotten. The Theosophical Society had three declared objectives: to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color; to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science; to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. To some, these were noble ideals. To others, they were dangerous. Blavatsky didn't care. She had already spent years traveling the globe. She had seen with her own eyes how the same truths echoed in Egyptian temples and Vedic chants, in Tibetan mandalas and Greek initiations. Now, she would bring those echoes to the Western world, and she would do it with a book. In 1877, she published her first major work, Isis Unveiled. 2 massive volumes, over 1,300 pages. The book was not just a spiritual treatise. It was an intellectual grenade hurled into the comfortable certainties of science and religion alike. She attacked the arrogance of 19th century scientists who believed that anything they couldn't measure didn't exist. She dismantled the hypocrisies of organized religion, accusing it of hiding, not revealing, the truths once entrusted to it. She wove together philosophy, physics, metaphysics, mythology, alchemy, ancient texts, and contemporary science, creating a syncretic map that redefined the nature of reality. Her style was sharp, ironic, and unapologetically confrontational. She wrote, "Science denies what it cannot explain. Religion conceals what it does not want discovered." Isis Unveiled was a scandal and a sensation. It sold out quickly. Critics attacked it with venom. Admirers called it a revelation. Scientists scoffed. Spiritualists applauded. Occult circles studied every line, but no one could ignore it. Blavatsky had drawn a line in the sand. On one side, a worldview limited to matter, mechanistic laws, and cold rationalism. On the other, a vision of the universe as a living, conscious intelligence, layered, mysterious, and governed by laws both seen and unseen. She argued that what we call miracles are simply natural phenomena not yet understood, that psychic abilities, astral travel, energy healing, these are not fantasy, but functions of a deeper science, one that modern minds had forgotten. She accused both science and religion of the same crime, blindness. Science, she said, refused to see beyond the microscope. Religion refused to see beyond the literal word. The truth, she insisted, was not owned by any one system. It was encoded in symbols, scattered across cultures and epochs, from the Eye of Horus in Egypt to the mandalas of Tibet, from the Sephiroth of the Kabbalah to the chakras of India. And these symbols, she said, were not just metaphors, they were maps. Maps of the soul, maps of the cosmos, maps of the unseen structure of reality. For Blavatsky, this wasn't belief, it was knowledge, a science older than science, a wisdom older than any scripture, a tradition not invented but inherited by those willing to see beyond appearances. And so the Theosophical Society grew. It attracted thinkers, artists, rebels, mystics, people disillusioned with rigid theology and the empty promises of progress, people looking for something deeper, something real. She never promised them comfort. She offered only one thing, the truth, but only if they were willing to suffer for it. Theosophy was not a religion. It was not a cult. It was, in her own words, the science of the soul, a way to understand the laws that govern existence and the latent powers that lie within the human being. Her mission was not to create followers, but to awaken seekers. She wanted people to study, to question, to deconstruct their assumptions, to stop thinking of the visible world as the whole world, and to realize that consciousness is not an accident. It is the key, a tool, a weapon, a mirror, because the path to truth does not begin with belief. It begins with doubt and the courage to look through the veil and see what lies beyond it. This was her challenge. This was her revolution. And Isis Unveiled was only the beginning. In 1888, Helena Blavatsky did something that no one expected, not even those closest to her. She released a book that would shake the foundations of metaphysical thought and plunge her further into both fame and infamy. The book was called The Secret Doctrine. 2 volumes, dense, arcane, monumental. If Isis Unveiled was a call to arms, The Secret Doctrine was the battlefield itself. In it, Blavatsky claimed to reveal the true origin of the universe, the hidden structure of matter, the evolution of consciousness, and the destiny of humanity. Not as taught by any single religion, but as preserved by a primordial science known to the ancients, hidden behind symbols and transmitted through initiation. She didn't claim authorship in the usual sense. She said the work was a transmission, a synthesis of ancient knowledge dictated to her by the Mahatmas, the invisible masters of wisdom who guided her hand and shaped her thoughts. Much of the book was based on the stanzas of Jung, a mystical text said to be older than any scripture known to man. Blavatsky claimed it originated from a lost language called Senzar, kept secret for millennia within the most esoteric schools of Tibet. For many, this was madness. For others, it was revelation. She wrote of root races, civilizations that rose and fell long before recorded history, Lemuria, Atlantis, and others yet to come. She described cosmic laws that mirrored and transcended natural law, karma, cycles, planes of existence, and involution and evolution of spirit and matter. She argued that human beings are not the pinnacle of evolution, but one phase in a long, sacred unfolding that spans realms and dimensions beyond current comprehension. It was daring. It was overwhelming. It was blasphemy to some, genius to others. But above all, it was dangerous. The moment the Secret Doctrine reached the public, a storm erupted, not just among theologians and scientists, but among the very people who had once supported her. Accusations resurfaced, old wounds reopened, and suddenly Blavatsky's life was once again placed under a microscope, this time with fire behind the lens. The most severe blow had come 3 years earlier, in 1885, when the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, a group formed to investigate paranormal phenomena, published a damning report. Their conclusion? Blavatsky was a fraud. They claimed that the letters from the masters, the cornerstone of her credibility, were forgeries. They said the apparitions, the materializations, the phenomena surrounding her were nothing more than well-crafted tricks. They accused her of deception, manipulation, and self-aggrandizement. The headlines were brutal. The queen of occultism exposed. Psychic charlatan or clever hypnotist? The great deceiver revealed. And for many, that was the end of the story. But not for everyone. Not for those who knew her personally. Not for those who had seen things they could not explain. And not for those who read the Secret Doctrine and found in it something eerily familiar, as if she had voiced something they had always felt, but never dared articulate. As controversy swirled, the Theosophical Society began to splinter. Some members abandoned her. Others stayed and doubled down, insisting the attacks were not about truth, but fear. That the institutions of science and religion were threatened, not because Blavatsky lied, but because she revealed too much. And then something unexpected happened. Years later, long after her death, the Society for Psychical Research quietly revisited their original report. New researchers examined the evidence and admitted what many had suspected all along. The 1885 investigation was deeply flawed, biased, emotionally driven, poorly documented. One of SPR's own key investigators, Richard Hodgson, was found to have conducted his research with preconceived judgment and had actively ignored or suppressed evidence that contradicted his conclusions. The SPR never made a grand public retraction, but among serious scholars the stain began to fade, and the question remained, if she was not lying, then what was she telling us? Because the Secret Doctrine was not just mystical poetry. It was filled with concepts, some of which bizarrely echoed modern science decades before it was developed. She wrote about multidimensional reality, the illusion of time, the wave nature of matter, the impermanence of physical form, long before quantum theory, relativity, or systems theory. She described the interconnectedness of all life, the idea that every atom in the universe is a reflection of the whole. She claimed that consciousness precedes form, an idea now explored in both Eastern philosophy and Western theoretical physics. And yet, she had no formal education, no laboratories, no scientific tools. How could she have known? Was she truly receiving knowledge from another plane? Or was she accessing something hidden within the collective human memory? Something ancient, deep, and sleeping. This is where the mystery becomes uncomfortable, because it no longer depends on whether you believe in Mahatmas or not, but on whether you're willing to accept that reality may be far more complex than we've been told. Blavatsky stood at the intersection of science, mysticism, and myth, and while she was not perfect, not a saint, not a guru, she was undeniably a disruptor. She did not seek worship. She sought awakening. She did not offer comfort. She offered challenge. And the Secret Doctrine was her final warning and invitation to look beyond appearances, to question everything, to remember what the ancients once knew, that the truth is rarely on the surface. It is hidden in symbols, stories, paradoxes, and silence. At the heart of Helena Blavatsky's life, beneath the controversies, the scandals, the myths and miracles, there was always a message not intended for the faint of heart, not offered to believers looking for comfort, but whispered to those who could stand in uncertainty, those who sensed, without needing proof, that there is more to this existence than what is seen, touched, and taught. That message was not a doctrine, not a dogma, not a faith. It was a bridge between science and the soul, between philosophy and the mysteries we've forgotten how to ask, between the ancient past and the future we still fear to imagine. Blavatsky didn't seek to create a new religion. She didn't ask anyone to follow her. She didn't offer salvation. What she brought was something far more dangerous and far more liberating. A language for the invisible. A vocabulary for those moments when rationality collapses, when intuition rises, when something deep within us remembers that truth is not always logical, but it is always alive. She spoke of the ancient wisdom, not as metaphor but as reality, a timeless current of knowledge passed down in symbols, in initiation, in silence, a wisdom once known to civilizations lost in time, preserved in fragments, in temples, in myths, in ritual, and in the spaces between words. According to her, this wisdom was not created by man. It was discovered. It was remembered. And it could be remembered again. Not through belief, but through a profound inner shift. A reawakening. In the 20th century, thinkers like Carl Jung would touch this same current, exploring archetypes, the collective unconscious, synchronicity, all concepts that echo, almost word for word, what Blavatsky had outlined decades before. Mahatma Gandhi would credit the Theosophical Society with introducing him to the Bhagavad Gita, a text that would shape his spiritual vision and political path. He called her work a path to liberation. Even Albert Einstein, who kept a copy of the Secret Doctrine on his desk, was fascinated by the convergence of mystical thought and scientific discovery. He is rumored to have said that Blavatsky understood the universe in a way science had not yet caught up to. So what exactly did she give us? She gave us the permission to question everything, to see spirit not as fantasy but as force, to see matter not as dead but as intelligent, to see consciousness not as a byproduct of biology, but as the origin of form, of experience, of life itself. She claimed that the greatest illusion of modern thought is that reality is purely material, that life begins and ends with neurons and atoms. She challenged this, not as a preacher, but as an explorer, as someone who had walked, studied, suffered, and returned with a map. A fragmented, complex, poetic map, but a map nonetheless. One that showed the human being not as a random collection of cells, but as a microcosm of the cosmos, a being with access to levels of perception and power that science could not yet measure, but which mystics and seers had touched for millennia. To Blavatsky, the problem was not that the invisible couldn't be studied. It was that modern culture had forgotten how to look. We had become blind, not because we lacked eyes, but because we had stopped using the ones that matter most. The inner eye, the eye of the soul. She wrote that the universe is layered, physical, astral, mental, spiritual, and that human beings are equally layered. That most suffering arises when we identify solely with the material and forget the higher principles that guide and sustain us. She saw suffering, war, greed, not as flaws of humanity but as symptoms of a much deeper disease. Disconnection from origin, from meaning, from the truth that we are not alone, not abandoned, not meaningless, that each of us is a node in a vast web of being, a cosmic architecture more precise, more intelligent, and more alive than anything our current systems are prepared to acknowledge. Her vision was not sentimental. It was terrifying and liberating. She warned that knowledge without ethics leads to destruction, that power without wisdom becomes tyranny, that enlightenment without compassion is just another mask for the ego. And so she placed before us a choice, to sleep or to awaken, to follow the surface or to dive into the depths, to accept the world as it is presented, or to tear away the veil and face the immensity beyond. Not everyone was ready. Not everyone is. But that was never her concern. She spoke not to the masses, but to the few, to the ones who hear the call before they understand it, to those haunted by a question they cannot name, to those who feel, without proof, that this world is only one page in a much larger book, and that somewhere in the spaces between matter and mind, between symbol and silence, that book is still being written. By us, by those who remember, by those who dare to look. So what did Blavatsky really bring? Not answers, but the courage to ask the impossible. Not truth, but the tools to recognize it when it appears. And not certainty, but the key to a door we forgot was ever there. So now we arrive at the final question. What if the greatest mystery of Helena Blavatsky isn't locked in her past, but still vibrating in the present? What if the voices she heard, the visions she followed, were not figments of a troubled mind, but glimpses of something real, something timeless that still surrounds us? What if the veil she spoke of, the boundary between the seen and the unseen, never went away? What if it's still here, right now, waiting for you? Blavatsky never claimed to be a saint. She was flawed, fierce, defiant. She made enemies, she made mistakes, but she also made history. She opened a door, not to a new religion, but to an ancient memory, to something that stirs deep inside the soul when the mind grows quiet, that sense that this life, this world, this body, are only pieces of a much larger design, and that something or someone is calling us to remember. But let's ask the question plainly. Was she a fraud, a genius of illusion, a woman who mastered the language of mystery just well enough to trick the world? Or was she something else? A messenger? A vessel for truths too large, too strange, too destabilizing to be welcomed by the world she lived in? Or maybe she was both. A paradox, a mirror reflecting our deepest hopes and our deepest fears. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When someone speaks of hidden masters, secret laws, invisible realms, and cosmic hierarchies, we laugh or we attack. Because deep down we sense that if it's true, then everything we've been taught is incomplete. And if Blavatsky was right, even about some of it, then the universe is not what we think it is. It is alive, it is conscious, it is structured, not just by physics, but by meaning. And meaning is dangerous, because meaning cannot be controlled, it cannot be sold, it cannot be contained in a laboratory or buried in a textbook. Meaning calls us to live differently, to think differently, to ask questions that can't be unasked once they're heard. Blavatsky asked those questions, out loud and without apology. She paid the price, but she never stopped. In her final years, sick and exhausted, accused and betrayed, she still wrote, she still taught, she still warned that the greatest enemy of truth was not ignorance, but fear. Fear of seeing too much, fear of remembering who and what we really are. And so she left us with a challenge, to question what we believe is real, to open the books that were never meant to be opened, to listen to the silence between the facts. Because maybe, just maybe, the world is made of more than atoms and accidents. Maybe it's made of patterns, of archetypes, of forces that move through history like invisible winds, shaping thought, destiny, and evolution. And maybe, if we're willing, we can tune into that current. So I ask you now, not as a narrator, but as a fellow traveler, what do you think? Was Helena Blavatsky a brilliant deceiver, or a woman chosen to reveal what the world had forgotten? Did she truly communicate with masters from beyond, or did she give shape to a wisdom buried in her own unconscious and ours? Did she lie, or did she show us a version of truth that simply terrifies us? Because if the universe really does hold secrets, would you dare to cross the veil? Would you have the courage to leave the safety of consensus and explore what waits in the shadows? Would you risk your certainty for a glimpse of something more? These are not easy questions. They are not meant to be, but they are the questions that awaken us, the ones that stir the soul and say, "Wake up, there's more, you've always known it." So if something in this story moved you, if something whispered to you through her voice, her visions, her legacy, then you know this journey is far from over. It's just beginning. Because Helena Blavatsky is not just a character in a forgotten chapter of history. She is a symbol of the part of us that remembers, of the part of us that dares, of the part of us that refuses to sleep when the world begs us to close our eyes. And if you're still here, still listening, then maybe that part of you is waking up too. So, subscribe, turn on the bell, leave a like, and most of all, leave a comment. Tell me, do you believe she accessed other realms? Or was it all metaphor? A journey of the mind, not the cosmos? Do you think she uncovered a buried truth? Or invented a myth too beautiful to ignore? Let's talk, let's question, let's remember together. Because here, in this space, we don't run from the unknown. We open it. Here, the hidden becomes visible, and the veil is just the beginning. Next chapter, Blavatsky's encounter with the invisible masters. We'll be waiting.